The Jenna Ellis Show. Here is your host, Jenna Ellis.
Hi, I'm Ron Coleman, a partner in the Dillon Law Firm, and I'm sitting in for Jenna today. So I guess the big news is legal news, and that works out well because I do a little bit of that. And I can't really talk about Trump in particular as a legal situation because our firm does represent Donald Trump. But I can talk about this topic in general. We are seeing a real meltdown here of institutions that once were entitled. Not only did they receive, but they were entitled to receive a certain amount of respect. It's a pretty severe meltdown, but it's not too surprising to those of us who've been involved in the courts for the last few years. Not every lawyer is involved in political cases or cases involving political figures. Not every case is political. Far from it. And that includes people such as myself and my partner, Harmeet Dillon, and our other partners. A lot of the work we do, I don't know if it's most, I don't know what percentage it is, but mostly we do business litigation or commercial litigation. I do a lot of trademark and intellectual property litigation, trade secrets, that sort of thing. But there has been a sort of a meltdown in the judiciary. I was recently talking to another very experienced lawyer, another litigator, about a case that we had both been involved in. And we were shaking our heads at the utter nonsensical nature of some of the rulings, and some of the procedural tacks taken by the judge in the case. This is a very well-respected, very senior judge in a very prestigious federal court here in the island of Manhattan, where I'm speaking to you from where I am speaking to you today. And he said to me, he had mentioned earlier that he's now semi-retired. He's not doing much litigation work anymore. And he said, you know why I stopped doing litigation, Ron? Because it seems as if there are no rules anymore. It seems as if there are no rules anymore. This is not a person who is representing Donald Trump, not a person who's involved in cases like our client, Andy No, who was brutally assaulted by Antifa members, and then when he brought them to court, they were let off the hook. These are not political cases. These are not controversial cases. This is just regular business. You see, when you let politics destroy the regularity of what you do, it destroys the regularity of everything you do. And that's what we've seen across the system. And it's very distressing that there are a lot of people who are not necessarily against Donald Trump. There are a lot of people who are not even that political, but who aren't particularly exercised or outraged over the abuse of the judicial system and the prosecution, the institution of government prosecutions as a whole. And not only against Donald Trump, but against the January 6th defendants, against Republicans, conservatives, people who speak out, people who are just in the wrong place at the wrong time. And you'll often hear them, and I'm not talking about far left wingers radicals, but rather they are people who will shrug their shoulders and say, well, that's life in the big city. That's these people, they brought it on themselves. What do I care? I don't like Trump anyway. You're missing a point. The system has been allowed to become completely unhinged, and there are lots of reasons for it. Let me talk to you a little bit about the quality of judges. I don't want to put on rose-colored glasses. This has been a phenomenon for a long time, and I don't want to be unduly optimistic. Well, I don't mean optimistic, but unduly, as I say, rosy viewed about what judges were like in the past. There was a time, though, when to become a judge in the New York State court system, and certainly in the New York City courts, and I'm not talking about in the era of Tammany Hall when everything was bought and paid for, or even in the era of Judge Rosenman, who was a tremendous fixer in the 30s and 40s, who was a very close, he was a New York State court judge and a very close advisor to FDR, completely corrupt. These were terrible people. Even then, there was a sense that even people who acted corruptly would take some pains to hide their corruption, would take some effort to avoid being out there with just how crooked they were, or just how callous or biased they were. To become a judge in New York, you usually had to have something, especially in the federal system, something of a distinguished career, usually involving both government service and private practice. And in private practice, it was a very common thing for someone to have done very well in a well-respected firm and basically not have to work anymore. And then take something of a pay cut to spend his senior decades, someone in his 50s or 60s, serving in the judiciary and drawing on his, and it was always pretty much his, not always, but pretty much, years of experience at the bar as a litigator. Today, people of that stature don't consider the judiciary. And there are a couple of reasons, some understandable and some lamentable. It's understandable that in a time when the most distinguished and successful lawyers in major firms, those who are most likely to be considered for judicial appointments by the President of the United States or by the senator or the senators from the state of, let's say, New York or New Jersey, that these people would be currently making literally 10 or more times more than a judge's annual salary. Now, regular people such as you and I might think, well, if you've been doing that and you've already been doing it for 10 or 15 years, you should pretty much be set for life, right? But we do see a strange paradox, is that with some notable exceptions, most people who make that kind of money don't feel that by virtue of having tens of millions of dollars in their retirement accounts, in their portfolios, they can now turn to public service, but rather they can't imagine not making that kind of money for the rest of their lives, not living the lifestyle that goes along with that. And it's not only the money, there's a tremendous amount of power and a lot of goodies, although that's true also if you become a judge. You get lots of goodies and lots of power too. That's lamentable, but I'm not sure what you can do about it. You can't pay judges $1 million a year, much less $2 or $3 million a year. And you can't even pay them $500,000 a year. You just can't. First of all, the longstanding issue that members of Congress are resentful if judges get paid more than they do. And nobody wants to see members of Congress get paid $500,000 a year, nor should they. And besides, we know that the vast majority of them make much more than that once they're able to establish themselves through the crooked methodologies that are employed in Washington to enrich public servants. It's much, much harder for judges to do that appropriately. I mean, it's not appropriate that they do it in Congress. You know what I'm saying? So the quality of the judges has gone down markedly. There's also the effect of affirmative action. There are excellent judges of every race, color, and creed, and there are terrible judges of every race, color, and creed, and sex. But there are certainly more bad judges than ever whose appointments can only be attributed to their melanin or their X and Y chromosomes. That's just the fact. Judges are worse. And they have been appointed through a process that really people with reputations, people who are more or less well known, would never put themselves through. Let's put the money aside. From time to time, people who are kind and flattering will ask me, would I ever consider an appointment to this court? I'm not saying that they're offering me. I'm saying friends, people that I encounter. Ron, you're so prominent. Ron, we'd love to see you on such and such court. Would not for all the money in the world. When you become a public figure in the United States in the 21st century, your life is over. You may choose to make bank on your life being over, so that if you're, say, Barack Obama, you only have a third to 40% something of the people in the country who hate your guts. And institutions that run things love your guts. And you can get baloney jobs like a production contract at Netflix or something for hundreds of millions of dollars just for being you. That works out great for people like that. But at the lower levels, at the judicial appointment level, not everyone gets to be a former president. It's pretty wretched, and especially if you're a conservative. People will attack you, people will destroy you if they think it is necessary to achieve their political goals. Look what they did to Donald Trump's judicial nominees. Look what they did to Justice Thomas and continue doing to Justice Thomas. You would have to be made of very, very stern stuff and very independently wealthy to even consider such an appointment. So the quality of the judiciary is much lower. And the judiciary is more sensitive than ever to public influence, to opinion. This is true on two levels. One is the obvious level that we would all understand, namely that you used to seldom read about legal cases in the newspaper. Only a very, very well-known case would be on the newspaper. Even fewer would be on the TV news or on the radio. So most people didn't have opinions about proceedings, about guilt or innocence. Nobody knew the names of judges. That wasn't necessarily better, but it was what it was. Today, you have live proceedings in certain state courts with play-by-play being announced by panels of learned legal scholars. I've participated in such panels myself a couple of times. It's kind of fun. People tweet about cases, they tweet about lawyers, they tweet about other lawyers. There is no sense anymore that you wouldn't think of criticizing another lawyer in public. Not at all. It's fair game. That's for the lawyers, but it's also true of the judges. So you have this welter of public opinion that works its way into the judges' chambers, because by now, even if the judges aren't on social media, certainly their clerks are. And I know that as soon as I make an appearance in a case, as soon as I get involved in a case, the clerks are looking me up on the internet. But you say to me, Ron, why would they look you up? Everyone already knows you already. No, they don't already know me. They don't. But they do pretty fast because I'm on the internet. And I have opinions. Okay. That works its way to the judges. The clerks know what the judges are interested in. They know what the judges do and don't like. And it is inevitable that the judges are hearing what other clients that attorney represents. Is that attorney a conservative or a liberal? I think most judges do their level best not to be influenced. I do think that. I truly do. There's another level, though. That's something I've spoken about before, probably not on this program. It's the level of the judicial culture. When I was a young lawyer, you would very seldom hear about cases being decided outside of notable ones in your own state, which you might read about, especially in New York City, in the legal publications. So in New York, you'd got the New York Law Journal. In New Jersey, the New Jersey Law Journal, which was weekly, not daily. New York Law Journal is daily on the weekdays. And you'd see notable decisions, and judges would probably look at the Law Journal also, and they would know what else was going on, but they would also hear from their fellow judges. They'd hear about it in the cafeteria, where judges don't really eat in cafeterias generally. They have very nice chambers for that kind of thing. But bottom line is, if a decision came out that was significant but not headline making in the Fifth Circuit, even in the Ninth Circuit, in other words, federal appeals court in Texas or in California, the news of that decision might not make its way to New York for months. A consensus would not develop with respect to any issue, much less any personality, among the judiciary for a very, very long time. And it was a slow process. And I'm talking about even in the beginning years of online legal research like Westlaw and Lexis. Now, of course, everything's instantaneous. Every decision is handed down. That is handed down is electronically accessible to basically everyone, with very few exceptions. And it's reported by sophisticated networks of legal reporting, both quasi-official and official and social. And consensus is developed very fast. That's what happened in the 2020 election. Every challenge to the criminal conduct of that election, and it was criminal, and it was fraudulent, was affected by what judges had already decided in other courts. Judges were looking over their shoulders. I wasn't there to see it. I'm just telling you, this is how I perceived it as somebody who was involved in the process and who is experienced in the courts for decades. Judges were looking over their shoulders, not communicating, not texting each other, but seeing what other judges were doing and doing the same because everyone wants the approval of his peers. The same thing happened during the challenges to the lockdowns. Judges were just following one another. They don't tend to be any more brave than most people. They don't tend to be any more interested in alone against tyranny or injustice. There's even an argument that perhaps in order to be the kind of person who will be considered for a judicial appointment, that these days they're probably less likely. Consider, after all, the case of Robert Bork. The turning point in that process I referred to before. A person who had very strong ideas, very well developed and very well defended intellectual ideas. So judges are part of a system of opinion and consensus, and they ought not be. But when you see the cutting and pasting that goes on from case to case to case, where the same formulas are recited over and over again, and I understand, and you should understand too, that lots of cases are very similar. Many, many situations arise over and over again. But for example, in the United States District Court for the District of Columbia, a consensus developed among the judges there, and this wasn't because of social media, that all January 6th claims way going to be how it was going to get done, and that's how it did get done. This is what happens in the judiciary, and that disdain for looking at every case with a fresh eye, which has always been a problem in the bigger judicial systems, such as the New York courts. There are so many cases. There are so many judges. There are so many litigants. There's so many people and organizations and entities litigating the same thing over and over again. We're all victims of pattern recognition. Justice is supposed to be better. The judicial system is supposed to be the justice system. It's not. And what we've also seen is an accretion of a very deep and very troubling culture among the prosecutor class of non-accountability. There's no downside. There's no discipline. There are no sanctions. Jobs are not lost. You can only fail upward. You're not rewarded for being a maverick. Mavericks are destroyed. You're rewarded for following the consensus. Just like in science, right? The consensus, remember the consensus. You can't rely on consensus anymore because consensus either doesn't exist, it's either fictionalized, or even if it's real, it's entitled to no deference whatsoever. So now we see Donald Trump convicted of a crime such as falsifying business records based on what a judge thinks of his reckoning of the value of his home in Florida. Oh yeah, judge in New York State Supreme Court knows more about that than the bank that lent the money. I tweeted something earlier today. Fudging, and I'm not saying anyone fudged anything, but I will tell you that fudging the value of collateral, whether on a credit application or on a periodic collateral report that might have to be submitted to a lender, is illegal. and virtually universal. Banks don't care. Banks don't care. They care about getting paid. You can inflate the value of your collateral all you want as long as you are actually remain a good risk. The second you stop paying, when I say you, I mean the borrower, and it could be another financial institution, or it could be a real estate developer, any kind of business person. The second you stop paying, all of a sudden you become a felon. All of a sudden, those optimistic projections, whether it's of cash flow or appreciation of real estate assets, every time you signed the bottom of that form that was submitted to the bank, if a judge or a jury or a prosecutor decide that you did so with intent to misrepresent the truth, you are pinned like a beetle. It's over. And keep in mind that in places like New York, the U.S. attorney's offices are basically Pinkertons, private detective and law enforcement agencies at the beck and call of major financial institutions. They can make this happen to anyone, anytime. It has never happened quite the way it's happening now, but it's always been there. Why didn't it happen like the way it's happening now? Because, as I said before, there was a certain fear, there was a certain respect, there was a certain hypocrisy that made people ashamed to conduct themselves like the head of the FBI, Mr. Wray, like the Attorney General of the state of New York, Letitia James, like the U.S. Attorney General, Mr. Garland. We're past that now. We're now in the era of open, quasi-Republican, small r, tyranny, where those who run things are going to run them the way they want, openly and notoriously. And you're going to like it. And if you don't, you will pay some price. This is the problem. It's a problem for former presidents. It's a problem for people who work for them, for professionals who have been engaged or would consider being engaged by them. Some of us stare into the mouth of the dragon nonetheless. Not because we're heroes, it's just because we're the kind of people who don't get the message. But this is what we're fighting. It's everywhere. It corrupts and corrodes everything. You can live it, you can live with it, or you can fight and fight and fight. And that's the fate of everyone listening to this. Thanks for joining me today. Jenna will be back really soon. Ron Coleman again. You can find me on Twitter at Ron Coleman. I've got a podcast of my own, Culmination. I have interesting guests. We have nice discussions. And I thank you once again for watching.